as this, Esther 4:14, such a time as this. We need to study the word, get prepared, tell the world the Lord is coming back. The Messiah of Israel, of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is coming back soon. Hey guys. So tea. If anyone's wondering what tea I'm drinking delicious passion fruit tea. This is the tea that I love. Adore, adore, adore. Yeah, let's jump into Esther. Hope that didn't mess up my focus. Okay, awesome. Let's do a quick background. Esther, the book of Esther, one of my absolute favorite books. This is one of the 2 books in the entire Bible that is named after a woman. The other book, Happy Labor Day, the other woman is Ruth. So Ruth and the book of Esther. Another interesting fact about this book. Esther is one of 2 books that does not mention explicitly God, the name of God, Yahweh. Anyone want to guess? What is the other book in the Bible that never mentions God's name, Yahweh? I am, or Yahweh, or God, or Lord. Okay, you guys got NKJV pulled up? Excellent. What is the other book that does not name God? Anyone know? This is an interactive study. Okay, seems like, okay. It's the Song of Solomon. Songs of Solomon is the other book in the Bible that does not explicitly mention God in it. Okay, so do some background on Esther. Esther is an awesome book in that it's brilliant, obviously, in the Lord delivering his people. It's a book of deliverance from God who seems silent, who is not mentioned in the word, not mentioned in the scripture at all. Seems silent, but God remembers his promises, and he remembers, he has mercy on his people. And when he makes a promise, he keeps his promise. And the promise is to look out for his people. That the promise that the Messiah was going to come out of Abraham, that Abraham is going to be a father of many nations, of many, many nations, that the stars in the heavens and the sands are not even going to count how many are not going to be able, Abraham's going to have way more children than that, than the stars in the sky. And the reason being is because of the coming Messiah that all the prophets were prophesying about, and that it was going to come from Abraham's seed, not seeds, seed, right? Isaac, not Ishmael. Jacob, not Esau. So the seed that was going to come is the Messiah that's going to save the world. And we're going to, so some of the main characters of this story is going to be Mordecai. Mordecai is a Jew who went into Babylon captivity when Babylon took over Israel. It wasn't, the Israelite land, so Jerusalem, and they actually took, the Babylonians, they took 10 tribes out of Israel and exiled them to Babylon. This was 586 BC. 586 BC. So we have Mordecai, who's a Jew who went to exile, and there's Esther, who is his cousin, his uncle's daughter, which we'll see, which is his cousin. And Esther is an orphan, and she has no mother or father, and Mordecai has been raising her in modern day Persia. Well, not modern day, it's actually modern day Iran. When after Babylon exiled the Israelites out of Israel, they went to Babylon. That's where Daniel was, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And then Persia took over. Persia became extremely prosperous empire and took over and defeated the Babylonians. And so this is the time 100 years after. So this book is 100 years after the exile of the Israelites out of Israel. And after the Babylonians have been defeated, they're taken over by Persia. And the Persians don't really have an issue with the Jews. They don't. But they obviously, there's obviously a man named Haman, who is the wicked villain in this book, who absolutely hates the Jews. And here's an interesting background story on this. How many of you guys know this, that Haman, who is an Agagite, right? Agag was the king of the Amalekites. who King Saul was told by prophet Samuel to kill. So back actually, even in Exodus 17:16, God told Moses that he's going to annihilate the Amalekites because the Amalekites were the enemies of the Jews. They absolutely hated the Jews. So when King Saul, the first king of Israel, the first king of the Israelites, was told by prophet Samuel to go out in the book of 1 Samuel, told the king, Saul, you have to kill all the Amalekites, including the king. And Saul did not do that. King Saul kept a lot of the spoils for sacrifices, and he also kept Agag the king alive as a trophy. And so when prophet Samuel saw the king alive, he said, what are you doing? So he killed him. Before he was able to kill him, he obviously had a wife and children. And so here's what's interesting. Agag is the lineage of Haman. So Haman, Amalekites, hate the Jews. And obviously Haman has vitriol for the Jews. It's an ancient feud. And when you look at Mordecai, he is from the tribe of Benjamin, the son of Kish, which King Saul was a Benjaminite, son of Kish. It's the same line. Haman's line with the Agags, the king of Agag, and Mordecai and King Saul. So it shows you how God has mercy, graciously allowing Saul's weakness with Agag not killing him to be countered with Saul's own seed, Mordecai, a few hundred years later, to get rid of the ancient enemies of Jerusalem, of Israel, the 12 tribes. Okay, so jumping into it. So who else we have? We also have Queen Vashti, and we also have King Xerxes or King Ahasuerus. So King Ahasuerus is the king of the massive Persian Empire that's extremely rich. We're going to see this beautiful symmetry. Yes, thank you. The Persians are obviously Gentiles, and they're pagans. They were pagan Gentiles. So we also have to keep that in mind when reading this book, because there are a lot of believers and Christian leaders and even Jewish leaders wondering, well, actually not as much Jewish, because it was one of their awesome stories in the Word. Some Christian leaders wonder why this book is even in the Bible, because we'll see this beautiful Queen Esther married a Gentile king and assimilated to the Gentile culture, being the Gentile queen, which is against the law, which is against the laws of Moses. Jews are supposed to be separate, not intermarry, and not assimilate to their culture, to Gentile culture. So, but anyway, gosh, it's such an awesome story. I don't even know where to start. All right, so let's jump into it. So that's the background. So there's this there are these coincidences throughout the entire book. These ironic coincidences, ironic reversals. So the book is so awesomely symmetrical. You'll see the king in the beginning, King Xerxes, King Ahasuerus, have this massive 180-day feast to show off his riches, and invites everyone in the kingdom to come and hang out and feast and joy. And they were drinking from silver glasses and gold glasses and sitting on couches that were lined with silver and silver bottoms, silver little legs, which is extremely rich. And so it opens up with this beautiful, huge feast, and the entire book ends with the Feast of Purim. You have in the middle, you have so you have the sides where you have the two feasts. Then you have where Mordecai saves the king, where Esther and Mordecai save the king, and in the end, you have Esther and Mordecai save the Jews. And then in the center, you'll have Esther's two-day feast that she holds, and in the absolute center is where we have this ironic reversal of Haman, who has exalted himself with pride and lacks dignity and principles, and the reversal of Haman and Mordecai, these arch nemesis, this ancient feud. And yeah, we're gonna just jump into it because there's so much to go through and it's such an awesome book. Okay, here we go. And here's my question, by the way. Do you guys mind if do you want me to read the word, or do you want me to put on an app? Because I have an awesome one and speaks very well and very clear, and let me know what you guys want me to do. We are live, guys, so chit chat. Thank you, who's ever moderating. Bless you. Okay, I don't have an OnlyFans, who's ever asking. I don't know what that is. Okay, I'm gonna drink some tea. God bless you. Oh, amen. All right, guys, I love tea. For anyone that knows me, I'm Russian. I'm half Russian, half Jewish. I love tea. Would be nice to read. Do you want me to read, or do you want the app to read? The app. Perfect. Oh, thank God. Honestly, like, I don't like to hear myself talk. Okay. Amen. And I also, by the way, listened to our last Bible study, and it was really clear. There was really no lag. So thank God there's no lag. Amen. Okay, cool. Human voice always better. Okay, how about we try it and let me know what you think. All right. Let's turn on the app. What app am I using, you might ask? This app. It's called the Audio Bible. This is a fantastic Audible Bible book. It is a dramatic audio theater with over 100, famous actors. I don't really care, but wonderful voices, the most incredible voices it's the whole Bible. It's so awesome, and it's NKJV. It's all dramatic with all the sound effects. It's really fun. So let's get this guy going, and we'll go through it, and I'll pause it as we go, and we will discuss some interesting details. All right, audio on. All right, here we go. Jump to here. Oh, you know what? Let me turn off I have my Bluetooth speaker on. Okay. All right, here we go.
Now it came to pass, in the days of Ahasuerus, this was the Ahasuerus who reigned over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. In those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan the citadel, that in the...
Shushan, I forgot to mention, Shushan, or sometimes they also call it Susa, is the ancient capital of Persia. And again, Persia is modern day Iran. But back during that time with King Ahasuerus, he was the king of Persia, and Persia extended all the way from India to Mesopotamia. So it was a ginormous empire that again defeated the Babylonians, and eventually had King Cyrus, who told the Israelites to come back from Babylonian exile to rebuild Jerusalem and to rebuild Israel. So Shushan is the capital of the Persian Empire. That is where the king lives.
Third year of his reign, he made a feast for all his officials and servants, the powers of Persia and Media, the nobles, and the princes of the provinces being before him, when he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the splendor of his excellent majesty for many days, 180 days in all. And when these days were completed, the king made a feast lasting 7 days for all the people who were present in Shushan the citadel, from great to small, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were white and blue linen curtains fastened with cords of fine linen and purple on silver rods and marble pillars, and the couches were of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of alabaster, turquoise, and white and black marble. And they served drinks in golden vessels.
It shows you how rich the kingdom is. This king is showing off his riches, and they're getting just smashed drunk every single night. 180 days again, golden cups and couches with silver legs, which at that time in the ancient time, that was extremely wealthy, extremely rich. Something very similar to what Solomon, his riches in Israel, very similar.
Each vessel being different from the other, with royal wine in abundance, according to the generosity of the king. In accordance with the law, the drinking was not compulsory, for so the king had ordered all the officers of his household that they should do according to each man's pleasure. Queen Vashti also made a feast for the women.
So in ancient times, the women would have their own separate feast, separate from the men. And actually, Queen Vashti, to give you some reference and some context of the time as well, the queen rarely ever comes out publicly. Rarely comes out publicly. And again, she's separate with the women having her feast. What you're going to see is that the king gets extremely drunk and wants to show off his wife's beauty and demands that she comes out to show her beauty. Now, at that time, that was extremely disgraceful, disrespectful for a queen to go and show off her beauty to princes and common people at the time. And if the king was not drunk, if the king was sober, he probably would have never asked her to come out, because it was so disrespectful to just show off the queen when, again, she's very private. She rarely comes out to be like a trophy in front of common people and princes. You'll see her response. She says no.
The royal palace which belonged to King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass, 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing her royal crown, in order to show her beauty to the people and the officials, for she was beautiful to behold. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, brought by his eunuchs. Therefore the king was furious, and his anger burned within him. Then the king said to the wise men who understood the times, for this was the king's manner.
So stop right there. So the king demanded the queen come out. Now, even though it was disrespectful for the queen to come out in public, you listen to what the king says, because if that's even worthy of death at that time. You listen to the king. And we're going to see this difference in 2 brides. We're going to see this legalistic bride, Queen Vashti, who is this, who knows the laws, who knows, how to hold herself. She knows how she would be perceived. Queen Vashti cared more about how she was going to be perceived than pleasing her king, who, even though he was disrespecting her and he was drunk, humbly come out and do what the king asked, and just do a little twirl, and he actually wanted her to dance a little bit as well. So there's a difference between this legalistic queen, and we'll see with Queen Esther, who was extremely humble, who did everything the king asked because she loved him, and she was a humble spirit. Again, this dichotomy of this legalist bride of legalism, and bride of love, which is what we have with our Father, through the Messiah, Jesus, Yeshua. We have this love, this relationship where we're happy to do whatever he asks, even if we look ridiculous. We absolutely look ridiculous to the world that don't know God, to pray for people, to heal people, to tell people about the gospel, to talk about salvation. It's embarrassing to do in public when, people think you're crazy, but we do it out of love, because we love him and we know he's real. There's no denying it. When we're born again, we know the Bible's real. We know that the Lord is good and the Lord is real, and he wants to save people, that there is a heaven, there is a hell. And we're happy we don't care if we look crazy, because we do it because we love him. So that's going to be the difference in the 2 queens we're going to see. So let's continue.
Toward all who knew law and justice, those closest to him being Karshina, Shetha, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsina, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who had access to the king's presence and who ranked highest in the kingdom.
What shall we do to Queen Vashti according to law? Because she did not obey the command of King Ahasuerus, brought to her by the eunuchs.
And Memucan answered before the king and the princes.
Queen Vashti has not only wronged the king, but also all the princes and all the people who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's behavior will become known to all women, so that they will despise their husbands in their eyes when they report King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought in before him.
So the king, in his displeasure, wrathful, angry, he's drunk again. This happened out of the 180 days. This was the last week of the feasts, the last week of the king showing off to his provinces, to his princes, to the common people. This is the last week, and again, probably so hungover from all the days of drinking and so drunk, he's now extremely angry and wrath and just total wrath, and asking his 10 wise men what to do. And I don't know if it's 10 or 7, I forget, but he's asking his wise men what to do. And his wise men said, it's kind of, I mean, it's understandable sort of, but a little ridiculous at the same time. Like, oh, well, women are going to see, it's actually not that ridiculous, because it is true. The queen is disrespecting the king publicly in front of everybody, and it makes the king look weak. So he has to in some way respond. And they responded by, telling the queen to leave. She can never see the king again. They're getting divorced, and making a decree that the man is the head of the household, telling women, know their place and to not disrespect them. You don't need to make this is why I say a little ridiculous. You don't need to make a law about that. I mean, it should be given. The man in the head is the head of the household. As a woman, he's there to protect you, and you're there, under his covering, because he's under the covering of God, and you protect the kids and he protects the kids. And so it's like, it's kind of ridiculous. You don't need a law to say that, but whatever. They did.
But she did not come. This very day, the noble ladies of Persia and Media will say to all the king's officials that they have heard of the behavior of the queen. Thus there will be excessive contempt and wrath. If it pleases the king, let a royal decree go out from him, and let it be recorded in the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it will not be altered, that Vashti shall come no more before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. When the king's decree which he will make is proclaimed throughout all his empire, for it is great, all wives will honor their husbands, both great and small.
And the reply pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. Then he sent letters to all the king's provinces, to each province in its own script, and to every people in their own language, that each man should be master in his own house, and speak in the language of his own people.
Okay, so we're going to see the king hold a beauty contest to find a new queen. And this is where we're going to be introduced to Esther. Queen Esther, who is beautiful. Ooh, I don't know why this is... Wait, why is this cut off over here? Maybe I should do that. Sorry, guys. Sorry. Why is this... Just move this over. Okay, here we go. Cool. All right. So Esther becomes queen.
After these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus subsided, he remembered Vashti, what she had done, and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's servants who attended him said,
Let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather all the beautiful young virgins to Shushan the citadel, into the women's quarters, under the custody of Hegai the king's eunuch, custodian of the women. And let beauty preparations be given them. Then, let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti.
Okay, so there's this beauty contest that is now being held in the Persian kingdom. These eunuchs or chamberlains are told to go to all these provinces, collect young virgins to be presented to the king to, as a beauty contest. And their preparation takes some time, many months, because they're not just preparing themselves, physically in terms of, their hair and oils they're going to lather on themselves to smell delicious, to become purified, clean. Again, this is like pagan Gentiles. But to be purified, cleaned, but they're also being prepared how to hold themselves as a queen. Again, Esther is a Jew. And actually Mordecai, we're going to see, tells her to not tell anyone she's Jewish, to keep that a secret. It was a secret that only Mordecai and Esther knew. Because again, she was an orphan, so you couldn't figure out really who she was. And so she kept that a secret. Now, the women are also prepared to know the law.
Being carried away from Jerusalem with the captives who were being captured with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And Mordecai had brought up Hadassah, that is, Esther, his uncle's daughter.
So Hadassah is Esther's Jewish name. Esther was her Persian name. And as we see, Mordecai, son of Jair, the son of Shimei, who King David eventually killed, spared his life for a long time and killed him at the end of his life, which allowed the son of Kish, a Benjaminite, to eventually lead to Mordecai, which we talked about is going to finish this ancient feud and fulfill God's prophecy in Exodus 17:16, where the Lord said, I'm going to annihilate the Amalekites because of their wickedness and their hatred for Israel. And also it says in Genesis, and it says that in, I think it was in Ezekiel, where anyone that curses Israel will be cursed. Balaam, prophet Balaam. Anyone who curses Israel will be cursed, and whoever blesses Israel will be blessed. So we're going to talk more about that, but this is their background.
She had neither father nor mother. The young woman was lovely and beautiful. When her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So it was, when the king's command and decree were heard, and when many young women were gathered at Shushan the citadel, under the custody of Hegai, that Esther also was taken to the king's palace, into the care of Hegai, the custodian of the women. Now the young woman pleased him, and she obtained his favor. So he readily gave beauty preparations to her, besides her allowance. Then 7 choice maidservants were provided for her from the king's palace, and he moved her and her maidservants to the best place in the house of the women.
So the favor that Esther's getting, she has been given 7 handmaidens. She's been given the best place, in the palace for the women. Favor over Esther, whether it be that Haggai, there was favor for Esther, for who knows for what reason. I mean, obviously it's the Lord that does things like that, but it could be her humility, could be her beauty. It could just be absolutely spiritual, that the Father, that God put a special favor on Haggai's heart to nurture her, to give her the best chance of winning, because he saw something in her that would make her a wonderful queen. Because he's seen a lot of women, and he's, seen Vashti and her legalism. And so, he knows what the king needs.
Esther had not revealed her people or family, for Mordecai had charged her not to reveal it. And every day Mordecai paced in front of the court of the women's quarters to learn of Esther's welfare and what was happening to her. Each young woman...
So Mordecai would sit at the king's gate. That's where he always propped himself. He was always sitting at the king's gate, smiling, and that's just where he was every single day. And obviously with Esther being not far away, he was there to see if he heard anything, how she's doing, and he's just so anxious and probably so excited that, you know, here's a chance of being with the future queen. But again, it breaks Jewish law, the laws of the Torah, where you're not supposed to marry a Gentile, and you know, you're supposed to be separate. You're not supposed to assimilate. You're supposed to have your own Jewish traditions, and you know, you live in this land in peace, but you are separate. You don't intermarry. So I wonder what was going through his mind, but it's interesting.
His turn came to go in to King Ahasuerus after she had completed 12 months preparation.
12 months preparation, 1 whole year. 1 year, which is customary. It was customary even in ancient Galilee. It was customary that you'd be engaged and betrothed for a year, preparing yourself for a year before your wedding day, before, you know, you meet your bridegroom. So same thing in ancient Persia. It is a year wait of being cleansed, of being purified with oils, preparation with learning laws, etiquette, all that kind of stuff.
According to the regulation for the women, for thus were the days of their preparation apportioned: 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with perfumes and preparations for beautifying women.
Imagine that, 6 months with oils, 6 months with perfumes. Man, you know, it might seem, yeah, I'm sure it was awesome on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's like every day, you know, for 6 months each, these oils and perfumes. I mean, sure, they were lathered and pampered, but I don't know. I don't know if I could take a year of that.
Thus prepared, each young woman went to the king, and she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the women's quarters to the king's palace. In the evening she went, and in the morning she returned to the second house of the women, to the custody of Sheashgaz, the king's eunuch who kept the concubines. She would not go to the king again unless the king delighted in her and called for her by name.
So one by one, these young virgins are sent to the king's quarters to be picked out, see which one he likes the best. And they can only come, obviously, if he calls for them. And if he calls for them again, they would come. So it's some beauty contest. Imagine beauty contest of like, who's the best in bed? Like, pagans.
Now when the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter, to go into the king, she requested nothing but what Hegai, the king's eunuch, the custodian of the women, advised.
See how humble she is. So every woman, every young virgin was allowed to ask for anything she wants. What kind of dress, what kind of, you know, shoes, what kind of jewelry, what kind of, you know, the women were allowed to choose what they wanted. They can demand, you know, for a hair piece that they want, or gold and silver, whatever they want, they can ask, and it would be given to them. Whereas Esther said she didn't demand anything. She just said, hey guy, you know the king best. Why don't you pick something for me? Whatever you pick, I'll wear. How humble. Here is your opportunity to ask for diamonds and gold and all this stuff. You can imagine she probably walked in so beautiful, but so simple. These women probably had ginormous headpieces and gold and everything, gold necklaces, and here's Esther, probably so beautiful, doesn't even need all of that stuff to show her and resonate her beauty. Came in humbly, and Haggai again favored her because of her humility, her meekness, her trust in Haggai, that he is the Lord, he's representation of the Lord, the king, his right-hand man. So if anyone's going to know how she should dress, it would be Haggai. So why not ask the guy who knows him well, the king well, and figure out what to wear? That is called wisdom. Wisdom. When you ask advice from people who are way smarter than you, or people that have way more experience than you, or are experts in a certain niche, that's wisdom. To not be stubborn and ask someone, hey, what do you recommend? Because you know the king really well. That's called humility and called wisdom.
And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all who saw her.
And again, more favor, because they're like, wow, she is so meek. She's so humble. She's so smart. She's asking Haggai what she should wear. Favor.
So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. The king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. So he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti.
So the king obviously was enamored with her beauty, and there was favor on her as well from the king, and he instantly took the crown and crowned her. From what research I've done, normally that's not done that way. The king would go and speak to his chamberlain and would, not ask him for advice, but there would be a protocol of about, you usually wait a week or something like that. But the king didn't care about the protocol. He took the crown and put it on Vashti's head and, had a ceremony and crowned her queen that day. That's unbelievable, and that is such favor.
Then the king made a great feast, the Feast of Esther, for all his officials and servants. And he proclaimed a holiday in the provinces and gave gifts according to the generosity of a king.
Big feast.
When virgins were gathered together a second time, Mordecai sat within the king's gate. Now Esther had not revealed her family and her people, just as Mordecai had charged her. For Esther obeyed the command of Mordecai as when she was brought up by him. In those days...
It's this, there's a reason why Mordecai obviously told Esther to keep her identity secret. It turned out that it was the plan of God for them not to say anything, that it worked out because of God using her. But it's also interesting that she was hiding it even when she was queen. Again, the Jews weren't hated at the time, but they were considered slaves because of their exile out of Israel and into Babylonia. So even though they weren't living as slaves in Persia, they were free people. They were free to leave. Ezra and Nehemiah went back to Israel. There was only like a few thousand people that left. Many of the Jews, even though they were allowed to go back to Israel, they decided to stay in Persia. It was comfortable for them. They didn't want to carry, the horses or their cows or their cattle. They were comfortable where they are, and they decided to stay. And God didn't explicitly say, all right, guys, time to come back through a prophet. Instead, God assumed that people would go back because that was his promise, that they were going to return to Israel after 70 years in Babylonian exile. So again, the Persians took over Babylonia. They were free to leave, and a lot of Israelites did not leave. They stayed in Persia. And this is another example where we're going to see of God's will. God's advice is always the best advice. If he is letting you know, hey, go back to Israel, that's where you're supposed to be, it's better to go back there. Listen to the Lord's will. He's doing it to protect you, because this situation happened with these Israelites that did not go back to their promised land, stayed in Persia. This situation arises where they are close to being annihilated, every single one of them. So it's always good to listen to God. He knows what's going on. He knows the future. So, he's trying to protect you.
While Mordecai sat within the king's gate, two of the king's eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh, doorkeepers, became furious and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. So the matter became known to Mordecai, who told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. And when an inquiry was made into the matter, it was confirmed, and both were hanged on a gallows. And it was written in the book of the Chronicles, in the presence of the king.
Okay, so gallows were a big long stake, and that is where people were hanged. Where we see, we see here that it was God's providence as well for Mordecai to overhear two guards who were planning to assassinate the king. And Mordecai told Esther, Esther told the king, and the king had did an investigation, found out these two were going to kill him. They were killed for treason, and the king must have forgotten that it was Mordecai. Maybe he didn't know that it was Mordecai who said this, because there was really no thank you to Mordecai at this time. There was no, public thank you, or he saved my life, or any favor on Mordecai. It was just Mordecai told Esther, and the king was saved. But it actually, what's cool about the situation is that the king got to see, wow, I can trust my queen. She has my back. She legitimately has my back. Okay, going to Esther 3. This book has 10 chapters. They're pretty quick. I know we're stopping along the way, so it's a little more time, but I hope are you guys enjoying this, going through it little by little and piece by piece. There's so much to unravel, guys. There's something that we're gonna talk about after we get through this chapter, which it was a revelation the Lord gave me a few months ago as I was reading this book. Such revelation, brought me to tears about this story. So stay tuned. Man, it's so good. And obviously we're here because we love to study and read the word. And even if we don't know the Lord, it's cool to let's hear what he's done in the past, which, by the way, any atheists watching, or agnostics, there's history. There's archaeological evidence for Esther. Greek, what was his name? Histories of Herodotus. He was a contemporary Greek historian who wrote about Queen Esther. There are stone tablets from Persia, the Persian time, where they talked about Queen Esther. Unfortunately, modern day Persia is Iran, and they hide the fact that the once beloved queen was a Jewess. She was a Jew. They hide that. They try to erase her out of history, but there's so much architectural evidence. There is so much historical evidence, so much written down, evidence that Queen Esther was in fact a Jewish queen in Persia. And what happens next? Next chapter. Chapter 3.
After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him, and set his seat above all the princes who were with him.
So this is Haman's exaltation. So Haman was promoted. There was favor on Haman's life as well with the king. And he promoted Haman, who again is the Agagite, going back to King Agag. The Agagites, the Amalekites, were nefarious enemies of Jews. And let's keep going.
And all the king's servants who were within the king's gate bowed and paid homage to Haman, for so the king had commanded concerning him. But Mordecai would not.
So all the king's servants were within the king's gates, bowed and paid homage to Haman. Essentially, almost like he's royalty, like a monarch, because in a monarch you bow and you pay homage. And the king had commanded, so the king had commanded concerning him. So the king wanted people to honor Haman because he's been elevated. The king wants you to honor him, not as a royal, but out of respect, because he's being put in such a high position for people to honor him.
Bow or pay homage.
But Mordecai would not bow or pay homage. Mordecai refused to worship this man. Mordecai probably knew, this is what I'm guessing, Mordecai is either very stubborn or he was very well aware of the fact that Haman was an Amalekite, which is an ancient, well, it's ancient for us now, at that time was an arch nemesis, was an enemy of the Jewish people, that the God promised Moses, Exodus 17:16, that he was going to annihilate the Amalekites. So Mordecai's either very stubborn and he doesn't honor anybody except God and his family, or he knew who Haman was, who his lineage was, and that God was not happy with the Amalekites, and that King Saul was supposed to annihilate every one of them, but they're still left here. He was not going to bow down and worship someone that God cursed and doesn't accept. So
Then the king's servants, who were within the king's gate, said to Mordecai,
Why do you transgress the king's command?
yeah, because again, transgressing king's command, it's worthy of death. You know, you listen to the king when he tells you what to do. With Vashti, the king exiled Vashti. With Vashti, the king exiled her. He forced her never to look at him again. But in this case, you're asking either to be exiled or to be killed. It's an offense. You listen to what the king tells you. Everyone was on tippy toes around the king not to make a mistake, because in that day, off with your head was or being hanged on the gallows was common. Mordecai is either really stubborn or he is confident, because he knows God's promises. He knows that the Amalekites will be annihilated, and he was probably confident, God has me protected, and I'm not going to bow down to someone who is our enemy, because cursed are those who curse Israel. That's what the father said.
Now it happened, when they spoke to him daily, and he would not listen to them, that they told it to Haman, to see whether Mordecai's words would stand. For Mordecai had told them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that...
When Haman was told that Mordecai is a Jew, his enemy, what? He was probably livid, which he was. He was livid.
Mordecai did not bow or pay him homage, Haman was filled with wrath.
And let's talk about this for a second. Mordecai refused to bow down. Mordecai only got on his knees to worship God. And it kind of speaks to the time we're living in now. Do we bow down and cower to pressure of worshiping men? Or are we going to worship God? Like for me, I don't bow down to anybody. I bow down to Father God and his Son and his Holy Spirit. I don't bow down to people. I'll respect people, but if you demand me to worship your idols or demand me to worship you as a human being, I'm sorry. I'm not going to do that. And so it's such a time as this where we're seeing Mordecai not bow down. So, interesting.
But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him of the people of Mordecai. Instead, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews.
So, Haman found out that Mordecai is a Jew, and that he was not... First of all, Haman is so prideful. He wants to be honored and he wants to be exalted. And it must have been a thorn in his side that Mordecai, who happens to be a Jew, who he hates, is not bowing down to him and not worshiping him and not honoring him. Haman was so mad that he plotted to annihilate not just Mordecai, but all of the Jews there. Again, bringing back to mind this ancient feud that they had, this hatred, this vitriol between the Amalekites and the Israelites. So it's interesting as well, because Satan, throughout history, used people to come after the Jewish people. He did that with Hitler. He did that with Herod to come against the coming Messiah. He did that with Moses, with the Pharaoh was trying to annihilate the Jew, well, using them as slaves and wanted to annihilate them when they left. We see this with Haman wanting to annihilate the Jews. Here's what it comes down to. And for any non-believer out there who's like, well, why is there such vitriol with Israel? Because God chose Israel to bring the Savior of the world, to rescue his people out of the pits of hell. A suffering servant that was to come, Psalm 22, Isaiah 53. The suffering servant who was going to be pierced in his hands and his feet and be laughed at and despised, betrayed, but is going to save the world, and his kingdom and his glory, his dominion will never end for all eternity. Satan knows that, which is why Satan knows as well. Ezekiel 12:10. Ezekiel 12:10 says that there will come a day where Israel, modern day Israel today, the Jewish community today, will realize that they actually pierced and killed their anointed one, Jesus, 2,000 years ago. They're going to realize it, and they're going to mourn as if they mourn their firstborn child. So in the other scriptures, it says as well in Revelation, I think it's 12:12, that the Messiah will return, Jesus will return, Yeshua HaMashiach will return to this world with judgment on not just wicked people, but on Satan. He will return right after the Bible, the gospel, comes full circle, because it came out of the Jewish people into the Gentile nations, Gentile world, back into Israel. And Ezekiel 12:10, when the Jewish people will realize that Jesus fulfilled every single prophecy, the only ones that are left is when he returns, because there's two entrances of the Messiah, one on a humble donkey and one on the clouds with his mighty angels in glory, on a horse, not on a donkey. Donkey shows peace, meekness. King comes on a horse. And when he's going to return, he's going to come as a mighty king with judgment. Satan knows his time is short. So Satan, in order to avoid his judgment, he has been trying to annihilate the Jews throughout history. Again, with Moses, with the Pharaoh, with Herod trying to come after the Messiah Jesus, with Haman trying to annihilate all of the Jews, Hitler trying to annihilate all the Jews as well. This is a demonic spirit. Anti-Semitism is a demonic spirit. This is Satan trying to stop the gospel, and not even just the gospel, but the word of God from coming true. But we know that God is great, and he keeps his promises. He's faithful. He is so faithful, and we see this in this story as well. Haman trying to annihilate all the Jews, but again it says, blessed are those who bless Israel, and cursed are those who cursed Israel. Curse Israel. So we see that happening here as well.
Who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, the people of Mordecai. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is, the lot.
Lot, pur. Pur in Persian meant dice. So when you think of lots, you think of dice. So in the first month, in order to, again, so Haman wants to annihilate Jews. And he's now casting lots to see what day are they going to annihilate the Jews. They probably, I don't know what kind of dice they had back in the day. It could be up to number 6. It could be up to 12 or whatnot. They're probably throwing a bunch of dice at the same time to figure out the day. And it turns out to be, you'll see.
Before Haman to determine the day and the month, until it fell on the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus,
There is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from all other peoples, and they do not.
So here is Haman coming to the king and saying, here's what we got to do. We got to annihilate these Jews because they don't follow the same laws we do. They're useless. Just let's get rid of them.
Keep the king's laws. Therefore, it is not fitting for the king to let them remain. If it pleases the king, let a decree be written that they be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who do the work to bring it into the king's treasuries.
So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. And the king said to Haman,
The money and the people are given to you, to do with them as seems good to you.
Then the king's scribes were called on the 13th day of the first month, and a decree was written according to all that Haman commanded, to the king's satraps, to the governors who were over each province, to the officials of all people, to every province according to its script.
So, the king has favor with Haman. Well, I should say, Haman has favor with the king, and the king didn't do his research. He probably didn't know that Mordecai was a Jew either. Well, he probably didn't really even know Mordecai because Mordecai was at the gates. And he probably didn't even know that Mordecai saved his life before and that he was a Jew. And he didn't do his research, and the king said, okay, sure, let's go. You can annihilate the Jews. If that's what you recommend, I trust you. You are like the prime minister here. Okay, I trust you. Let's kill them. And send out a decree to all the different provinces, 127 provinces, that there's going to be a day where they will annihilate all of the Jews. And it's not even this. So here's what's interesting about a king's